7 p.m. on December 31st, 2004, El Chapo's beloved brother was murdered at a prison facility in Mexico. His death was a form of karma for El Chapo's pride, ego, and evil deeds. So why exactly was he killed? Who ordered the hit? And most importantly, how did El Chapo retaliate his death? The death of El Chapo's brother, Arturo Guzman Lora, revolves around three men. One is the former leader of the Juarez cartel, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, his younger brother, Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, and El Chapo himself. These three men, in one way or another, had a hand in the death of Guzman Lora, aka El Pollo. It all started with the Sinaloa cartel's partnership with the Juarez cartel in the 90s. The Juarez cartel had a long history of smuggling narcotics into the U.S. through the Mexican borders, and after the assassination of its leader, Pablo Acosta Villarreal, Amado Carrillo Fuentes took leadership of the cartel. Now, under Amado's leadership, the Juarez cartel was transformed into one of the biggest criminal organizations in the world. That was also the period he got the title, Lord of the Skies, for his use of aircraft to move thousands of tons of Colombian cocaine into Mexico. However, Amado didn't live long enough to see his crime syndicate reach the heights he probably wanted. He died during a botched plastic surgery in 1997, and with his death, his criminal empire began to crumble. Also with his death, a tussle of power between his two brothers, Vicente and Rodolfo, ensued. But in the end, they decided two heads were better than one. They also decided to form an alliance with the other top drug lords in Mexico at the time, one of which was El Chapo. They called themselves the Federation and jointly decided on the different routes their individual cartels would control. But as you might have expected, their so-called alliance didn't last long. Rodolfo ordered the killing of El Chapo's associates because they didn't allow his men to use the Sinaloa cartel's routes to smuggle drugs, which obviously angered El Chapo. However, for some reason, he let it slide. Rodolfo then managed to further agitate El Chapo, causing tension between them to escalate. This time, it became personal. During a meeting with Vicente and Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, El Chapo tried to shake Rodolfo's hand as he was about to leave, but Rodolfo just let him stand there with his hand extended. At this point, El Chapo's ego sets in. He's had enough of his shenanigans and didn't give a damn about the consequences. All he wanted was Rodolfo dead. September 11th, 2004, Rodolfo was headed to a cinema complex where his wife and little daughter were seeing a movie. Normally, Rodolfo disliked his family going to public places, so he warned them to leave the complex early. And as soon as he got there to take him home, they were ambushed by El Chapo sicarios, killing both Rodolfo and his wife on the spot. To add more tragedy, they left the poor little girl to gaze upon both her parents lying in the pool of their own blood. This angered Rodolfo's brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, and as retaliation, Vicente ordered the killing of El Chapo's brother. An eye for an eye. June 9th, 1993, El Chapo was arrested by the Guatemalan army at a hotel near Tapachula, close to the Guatemala-Mexico border. He was extradited to Mexico 2 days later and was taken to one of the toughest prisons in Mexico, La Palma. Now, while El Chapo was behind bars, his brother El Pollo took leadership of the cartel. He was also placed in charge of El Chapo's kids while he was in prison, and was one of the few people that helped mastermind his 2001 prison escape. Here's how. January 19th, 2001. El Chito Camberos Rivera, a prison guard at El Chapo's prison, opened Guzman's electronically operated cell door, allowing El Chapo to get into a laundry cart that a maintenance worker whose name was Javier Camberos rolled through several doors and eventually out the front door. El Chapo then entered a truck waiting for him outside and was driven far away from the prison. His brother, Arturo Guzman Lora, aka El Pollo, was part of that operation. But with the escape meant El Chapo needed to go into hiding. This made El Pollo his main advisor and the man in charge of all the cartel affairs. However, not long after, the Mexican authorities apprehended El Pollo during a drug operation. He was then charged with promotion, production, trafficking, and extraction of cocaine and amphetamines from Mexico to the United States. He was also accused for creating a 60-meter drug tunnel built for smuggling on the border between Tijuana and San Isidro. As sad as that sounds, El Pollo was found guilty of these crimes and remanded at a Mexican maximum security prison. We don't know how to put into words how this made El Chapo feel. He knew to some extent it was all his fault that his brother was locked up behind bars. And he racked his brain day and night to find the perfect prison escape plan for him. He finally came up with a plan that sounded almost impossible to carry out. The plan was to use a helicopter, a Bell Textron Ranger 407 that El Chapo had bought for the mission, and it would be flown by his most trusted pilot, El Tinieblo, over the courtyard of the prison where El Pollo was kept. Then, a steel box would be lowered for El Pollo to enter and be carried away easily. The point of the steel box was that El Pollo would be safe from the bullets being fired at him by the prison guards. Another part of the plan involved installing loudspeakers on the chopper, telling the guards that there was a detector attached to the steel box, and if it got damaged, another chopper would come right away and drop a bomb on the entire prison facility. I think I know what you're thinking at this point. It's gotta be the craziest prison escape plan you've ever heard of, right? Well, it might have been, but it's crazy and almost impossible prison escape plans like this that make El Chapo the man he is today. However, word got out to the Juarez cartel that El Chapo was about to break his brother out of prison, and Vicente wasn't about to let that happen. So he ordered the killing of El Pollo inside the prison facility where he was remanded. Revenge. El Pollo was considered a high-level criminal due to his association with El Chapo. And due to his participation in El Chapo's escape, he was tagged as a high-level assassin by the United States authorities. And as you know, high-level criminals are extradited to the US, so El Pollo's extradition was already being filed before he was killed. Few minutes before the assassination on December 31, 2004, the murderer went to the bathroom to get the murder weapon he had hidden there for weeks. Then, at 7 p.m. sharp, El Pollo was shot 7 times with a 9mm while he was waiting for his attorney in the attorney's room. The plot of this story isn't how El Pollo died, but rather the events that took place before his death. Prior to the assassination, El Chapo and his family sent letters to the prison warden, alerting him that El Pollo was in great danger and should be transferred to a different prison. However, the warden didn't consider him being in any threat, because the prison facility was one of the safest and most secure in Mexico back then. Also, El Pollo's cell within the prison was among those reserved for 500 of the most dangerous men in the country, so the security was pretty tight and almost impenetrable. And that's also why he wasn't killed in his cell, because quite frankly it would have been impossible for that to happen. The man who committed the murder was another inmate whose name was Jose Ramirez Villanueva. Jose was an inmate serving life imprisonment for a murder he committed back in the 90s. And the shots he fired at El Pollo left bullet fragments in his chest, abdomen, and spine. But why did he do it? Well, prior to the murder, Ramirez was threatened with letters to kill El Pollo. He really had no choice because the threats on him were extended to his family. After the murder of El Pollo, both El Chapo and Vicente Carrillo Fuentes were even. Both their brothers were dead, so there was nothing to lose anymore. And this led to a full-blown war between both cartels. The first signs of war between both cartels came when the Juarez cartel kidnapped one of El Chapo's most trusted sicarios, known as Antonio Marufo, or Yaguar. Antonio and a former sergeant with the Juarez Police Department named David Sanchez Hernandez were in charge of controlling the cocaine shipments brought into Mexico from Colombia through two-man planes. Now, when the shipments arrived, they would be taken to a warehouse with escorts from the police department, just to make sure they weren't stopped or searched by other law enforcement in the area. But when the tensions began building between both cartels, Guayada was kidnapped by Juarez cartel sicarios and beaten to a pulp. It was pretty bad because these were the same guys he had worked with for years. It made no sense. However, after Marufo's release, the war officially began. The Juarez cartel created two different small armies to combat the Sinaloa cartel, the Aztecas and La Linea. But they didn't stop there. Vicente went ahead to create an alliance with the Zetas, the Beltran Leyva organization, and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. I mean, they're prepared like it's World War III, but El Chapo wasn't scared. He had a plan, and his plan barely involved being violent. He created a smaller fraction of sicarios called Los Salazar. One thing I want you to know is the Tijuana-Sinaloa War wasn't centered on killing each other, but rather to take control of each other's drug routes, thereby crumbling the opposition's criminal organization. And the major target was the state of Chihuahua. These drug smuggling routes are called plazas, and by winning over a plaza, the winning cartel group could charge other cartels or crime syndicates a specific fee if they desire to smuggle goods into the U.S. through their plazas. And these fees usually run up into the thousands of dollars or even millions, depending on what's being smuggled. So the process of winning over these plazas and claiming territory around the border resulted in the death of more than 10,000 people affiliated with these cartels. One of the most terrifying massacres from this war came in November 2009, when 17 family members from a prominent American Mormon family were killed, all because they decided to buy gas at a gas station owned by La Linea. Prior to this, Los Salazar had sent a stern warning to him to not buy gas from this station in Chihuahua, but for some reason, they didn't listen. On the other hand, La Linea felt threatened that Los Salazar was winning the war and were about to take over their plazas in Chihuahua, so they wiped out this family as a warning to them. But believe me when I tell you, this so-called warning did nothing more than to motivate El Chapo. He decided to play it smart. Instead of going after the plazas in Chihuahua, he took over the twin border cities of Ciudad Juarez and El Paso, Texas, gaining wider access to the U.S. Then in 2008, El Chapo went after the border in Chihuahua and New Mexico, wiping the Juarez cartel out of their territory. And when the Mexican government sent troops down to these borders in a bid to stop the killing, El Chapo adopted a bribe-over-bullet strategy. He preferred to bribe corrupt authorities rather than fight them into submission. And with that, he was able to keep his own people safe while his rivals like the Juarez and Gulf cartels lost men like flies every day. Eventually, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes lost the war and was arrested. Weeks before his arrest, Vicente was tracked by Mexican forces in the area where he lived in Chihuahua. Then on October 9, 2014, while Vicente was traveling in the Palmas San Isidro neighborhood aboard a blue Silverado van, he was intercepted and arrested alongside his bodyguard. He was charged and sentenced to 28 years in prison. And although El Chapo was arrested earlier that same year, he managed to escape in 2015. But right now he's facing life imprisonment at the toughest prison in the US, the ADX Florence. The question now is, with the leaders behind bars and with some of them dead, will the Mexican drug war ever end?